Hello, everyone, and welcome to One Control Port Podcast, episode 318. I'm Benjamin Yoder, here today to talk to you about video games. I got actual video game, kind of. I think it depends on how much you value certain types of video games, but we've got actual video game that I have played to talk about, Shanghai Triple Threat, which we'll get to later in the show, so we'll talk about that. Also, I did a little bit of like a handyman times kind of thing, so I broke open some controllers, and that was an adventure, so we'll that as well. And then a few different little like mobile game stories. We got a Yuji Naka update, all that fun stuff, and I think some new games as well. Some new smaller games from actually some older publishers. So that will be interesting. Although maybe I should say maybe not new. Some of them are new. Some of them are like, I mean, it's one of those things where like some old publishers make new games, but they're based off old things anyways. So whatever. Video games are happening this week. But first, before we get into anything other than that. Before we get into the actual digital video games, let's talk about physical video games, touching video games. So one thing, I don't know if I've talked about this on the show much. I suspect I am very rough with controllers. I say this because I have gone through, I feel like, more controllers in my life than most other people. And I also use controllers in ways that I feel like most other people don't use controllers. Like I kind of like grip the analog stick in weird ways with my thumb and things like that. So I think there are things that I do with controllers that most people don't do. And it results in me getting controllers that have more issues than I think other people usually do. I could be wrong. That is just what I suspect. But you know, it only makes it worse when a controller has kind of a greater issue that's happening as well. So if you're not aware, PlayStation 4 controllers, pretty much every modern controller that has come out has some form of something called stick drift. And what that means is basically the sensor on the inside of that analog stick gets a little roughed up over time, and then like it can make it so your character doesn't move so nice anymore in games. Like it thinks you're putting in different inputs than you actually are, which depending on the game, that can be more important than others, right? And when I was playing Street Fighter 6, I had this come up again, and it wasn't usually a problem since I mostly am playing, Street Fighter 6 with the D-pad, but it was in the World Tour mode. I'd walk forward and then just like suddenly jut off to the left for no real reason and get stuck running left until I like reset the stick basically. So it was doing some weird stuff, and that was my last PS4 controller. So I was like, okay, well, I bought a new one. I bought a red one actually, but I was like, I really have a pile of these old PS4 controllers, so I should at least try to do something with these, because there's a couple ways you can fix them. The way I previously had heard was basically desoldering off the analog stick component, so everything's soldered on using metal, melted metal essentially, that keeps the component on, so you have to kind of have a skill set in unmelting that metal and remelting a new piece on, right? And a lot of people are scared to do that, and myself included. But the other thing you can do is that analog stick box has like this little green cover on the sides, on the left and the top of it, and you can basically rip that off. Not rip it off, you're not ripping it off, you're bending it, and you're bending it open, and there's a little sensor inside that you're taking out with like tweezers, and you can put in a new sensor inside as well, and usually you want to clean it as well using like rubbing alcohol and Q-tips or something like that. So that was my goal with all those controllers, was to go in and try to replace all those sensors on those controllers, even the ones on the right analog stick. I gave that up partially because I forget if it's the first controller or the second controller I worked on, but I had issues where some of the controllers, after I put the components back together, the sensor would grind against the components in the stick. And so like obviously something went wrong with those, but thankfully, I got probably around 50% of them good and through, and so now I have 2 additional working PlayStation 4 controllers at this time, at least for now. On the bright side, even though I made those other 2 controllers worse controllers now, the reality is that I wouldn't have really used them anyways if that's controller drift. I mean, I could have used them, but it was not ideal, and I wouldn't want to play anything long-term that way, so I don't feel too bad about it, but I think the answer is, I have a catalog of PlayStation 2 controllers that are no longer working, GameCube controllers that are no longer working, a couple of other things as well, and the reality is that, like, I probably just need to be more knowledgeable with soldering, especially like since I don't know how long I plan to go this real hardware route in my life. I think I am slowly pushing away from that, but I have the baggage of that for now, right? And so being able to more affordably repair these controllers, I think will make a lot more sense than constantly buying new controllers. I did buy what was it called? For the PlayStation 2, it's called the Retro Fighters pad. It was recommended, I think it was like Styles or something. He's like a Final Fantasy YouTuber recommended to me. And I have not tried it yet. It's been sitting here for about 2 weeks. So, getting out of that return period for Amazon, and I just keep pushing it off. But I picked that up because it has the button sensitivity things with the PlayStation 2 controller. But, until I get away to solder those controllers, like the reality is that I'd have to either buy a used PS2 controller, which, could very well just die on me immediately afterwards, right? Or I need to buy third-party controllers and hope they are of good quality. I haven't tried this one yet, so I can't speak for it. Or I can solder and basically try to fix the things that are broken inside the controller. So we'll see. But, at the very least, 2 more PS4 controllers, I think I can feel pretty good about that, even if I did make the other 2 not work as well. Unfortunately, it's the 2 black ones that I got working well, and the purple one, and the, I think it's, cobalt one. I did not. And I didn't have a working black controller, so it's nice to have one, but it would have been nice if one of the colored ones worked as well and not just having 2 additional black controllers. And because of the build of the controllers inside, they're not easily swappable depending on when the controller was made. Or at least what model of controller it is, maybe I should put it. So anyways, that was kind of fun. I also removed some PSP batteries as well, but that takes 2 seconds to do. A friend of mine was talking about his batteries bulging on his PSP, and I was like, I should probably take those out as well. So I went and took those out, put them in the same bin as my Nintendo DS batteries that I took out, GBA batteries as well, or GBA SP batteries as well. And I don't know what to do with them other than I guess throw them in that bin, and if one of them starts leaking, it's gonna get on all the other ones. So I don't know if they're just there to be forsaken or what, but if I ever need a portable PSP and that battery's not bulged and acided, there's something there for me. Although I think those batteries more or less are dead. I mean, I'm gonna guess there are replacement batteries out there, even if they aren't OEM, original Sony batteries, right? I could be wrong, but anyways. So that was interesting. I also was really happy to see that NoClip, this is the YouTube channel that's run by Danny O'Dwyer, old GameSpot guy, from the UK, I think, or Ireland. I think Ireland. And he has been running a documentary channel for a long time, and he got his hands on a ton of old tapes that include various videos on there that were used for things like TV, web shows, uploaded to wherever, right? It was basically how game footage and stuff would get distributed in the past, right? You get a tape in from the publisher, or you would record a tape an event, and then you go upload it to the nightmarishly compressed version of it on the internet for many years. I mean, even today we still have compression issues with video going online. But anyway, so that was really cool that he was able to go and save these tapes from what sounds very likely to be Giant Bomb. If you don't know, Giant Bomb had a lot of turnover, and also they were purchased by another company, and they had been kind of hoarding tapes from GameSpot and CNET and things like that. So it sounds like they were going to get tossed out, and they were able to save them. So that's really awesome. So there's some really cool things in there. These are, mostly old things. So you're not going to see anything really new for the most part, but there's some unseen stuff in there before, where the Knights of the Old Republic, they have a press demo. Maybe I shouldn't say unseen, previously not widely available to the public. But it's a press demo for it, which is really cool to see. That's stuff that you don't really get to see often as somebody who's just watching the industry outside of it. There's a panel that include Peter Molyneux, some guy from Bungie, and Peter Jackson, which is a really awkward panel. I don't really know what they were trying to go for. I think it's storytelling in games, but Peter Jackson, it seemed like it was really just Peter Jackson and then Peter Molyneux and the Bungie guy all being video games and movie storytelling are different. And not really being sure what to do, other than it was sponsored by Xbox. So every once in a while they go yeah, and the Xbox can do this, or the Xbox will help us with this kind of thing. So that was kind of funny. And then there's also like studio tours with Infinity Ward in like 2006 going around, which the nice thing is it's not like the final edited version of the studio tours with like, music put over everything and cut down. It's just like the dude recording it and they're just like, all right, let's just come in here. And it's just like a bunch of dudes basically walking around an office, just joking around and stuff while they show off this building, which is pretty cool. Nintendo Studio Tour 1 is more or less just like, it's like a Nintendo museum at Nintendo of America, I think is what it is. I didn't finish it. I got about halfway through it. But it basically just kind of walks through like the different display cases they had showing and things like that. I think it's their old offices before their current office. And so it was like 2005, 2006. It says like TVs with like Chibi Robo running on it and things like that. So it's pretty cute overall. And there is like some more normal video game stuff that's just like higher quality of like, oh, here's this trailer that, came out in the past or commercial that came out in the past. And it's been uploaded to YouTube, but it's like a copy of a copy of a copy, right? And all through these different compression platforms, compression, whatever codecs and things like that. And so they just continue to get degraded down. So it's nice to get like nice 1080i-ish usually versions of these kind of videos and things like that. So I really appreciate that. I think the only real moment of any kind of weird revelation I had watching them was watching the Tokyo Extreme Racer 2 demo, which basically just has like a little bit of a guy talking up front and just some weird stuff with like street racing, giving like a very like, I don't know, pumped up version of street racing, it feels like. But in Tokyo Extreme 2, then they show off like gameplay for the game, and there's music and stuff in the background when you play Tokyo Extreme 2. But in this gameplay demo, there wasn't, I assume because potentially this could go on TV and they didn't want licensing issues and things like that. So it's just like driving around and playing that game with sound effects, but no music. So it's really kind of interesting. It did make me realize that like I have no idea what kind of game Tokyo Extreme Racer series is. Actually, no, sorry, it wasn't Tokyo Extreme Racer 2, it's Tokyo Extreme Racer 0. I don't know anything about the Tokyo Extreme Racer series, I realized. And I talked to a friend a little bit about it, and there's some interesting things about, like, it sounds like you just kind of, like, drive around the highway and then flash lights at people, and then you race them. So it kind of sounds like the arcade Initial D experience, but at home, and you kind of drive around in the periods in between the races rather than just, immediately going from race to race to race kind of thing. So I think there's probably a day that I would be interested in checking out that. And the other thing is that the developer of Tokyo Extreme Racing is Genki, which I know is not a name that comes up on this podcast very often, but Genki is a developer like fairly relevant to me because I'm a big fan of Spectrobe's Origins, and they worked on Spectrobe's Origins. And I'm also a big fan of Kabuki Warriors, which is also Genki. Maybe it wasn't Genki specifically. I don't remember. There's this weird relationship that Genki and Bursula Lightweight have, where like they kind of, I think Genki owned Bursula Lightweight for a while, but then they like split off at some point. It's very strange. So there's some weird like stuff where like game credits are lined up or like overlap between the two companies, but then they kind of split up as well. But Lightweight is known for being the Bushido Blade developers typically. That's the big thing. And for me, they've also been they're also the developer of Kengo. And so Kengo is a game series that I've always been really interested in checking out because it takes, or at least the original Kengo, has this very quiet approach. It takes the Bushido Blade and how like all those scenes are like really quiet when you're fighting, just like ambient noise and stuff in the background. It takes that and basically builds the whole game around that. And I really like that. There's also something I was thinking about recently as well, after I was, going through all this. It made me think about like what I was asking for out of Street Fighter 6 last week. And realizing maybe Kengo is what I want out of Street Fighter 6, right? Where like you learning the skills and abilities in this game feel a lot more important to the world itself. I say this not knowing anything about Kengo, really beyond what little I've seen. So I'm not saying that it is successful in that regard, but that's what it always felt like to me. Is like you are this samurai, you choose a dojo that you go to. Samurais, as far as I'm aware, at this point, I think the story says that like, hey, samurais are irrelevant. And so what do people do who like to do the use the sword? They just go train, master it, and then they go into tournaments, and then they probably die while going in the tournament because they get stabbed. They're using swords. So I'm kind of fascinating in seeing like how that plays out, but it seems really interesting. So I would really like to play Kengo sooner rather than later, but we'll see when I actually get there. One other thing, actually, Burst Little Lightweight, they're still around. Genki's still around as well. I don't know what Genki's done recently. I should have looked into that too. But Burst Little Lightweight specifically, they actually did a gambling game, which is called, what is it called? Baku Toneko, which is like just a bunch of anime characters, and I think poker, it's like the thing where you do like call, raise, and all that stuff. So like part of me in my adventure of being interested in gambling games, it caught my eye. We'll see if I actually check it out. It is a Android and iOS game. Looks like it's Japanese only, so I think I could probably set that up. I play Dragon Quest Champions, so I think I could probably log into my Japanese Gmail account or whatever it is and get in there and check it out. We're going to do something a little bit different this week. Instead of talking about the game first and foremost, that Shanghai Triple Threat, which we mentioned earlier, I'm going to do Jillian's Corners question. You'll understand why later, why we make this decision, but for now we're just going to do Jillian's Corners question first and foremost. If you don't know, Jillian supports the show via Ko-fi, and so she gets to ask questions like, what games did you play with your friends as a kid? I actually had maybe it's not surprising, you're a kid for 18 years or something like that, right? So it's Final Fantasy 11 one of those games? Who can say? Anyways, let's throw Final Fantasy 11 aside. I did play Final Fantasy 11 and Phantasy Star Online with friends, but I think maybe this is more intended as like a in person with each other maybe kind of question. I guess it probably could be either or. Who cares? I've talked enough about Final Fantasy 11 and Phantasy Star Online on this podcast. Worms was one. Worms, what was it called? Armageddon or something like that on Nintendo 64. It's one with like little worms that you can kind of walk around and shoot like projectiles at each other, and they blow up parts of the environment. And you have to. It's a really interesting game because it's almost got like a spelunky nature to it, where like doing things in the world that are like damage you will end your turn. So you have to be like very careful to make sure the things you're doing don't hurt you, or else your turn's over. But then you also have to do a lot of kind of risky attacks and things like that. So if you want to do close-up attacks, you have to be ready to, defend yourself. I mean, not really defend yourself. Are you able to take whatever attack that other person's going to do on you if you don't kill them, right? So do you have enough to kill them? What's your positioning? Sometimes positioning, even in melee attacks, matters in how much damage you do. When you're lobbing missiles across the map, you only get so much that you can actually see in terms of where you'll actually shoot, and then you have to kind of, in a golf way, choose the power of which you shoot as well. So Worms is a really fascinating game of kind of risk and reward. I think it's like strangely complicated, despite it being very easy to pick up and play. I don't think I ever thought about that with Worms before this, but that is what I feel about it now. I just leveled up my respect of Worms way higher than I ever had. You just heard it in real time. I also played Scorched Earth, which is kind of similar, but Scorched Earth, you're all stationary tanks, so you can't really do too much other than choose different bullet types. But it's kind of interesting because I think the landscape is randomized, and so you get placed randomly as well, and so some people get placed in really inconvenient spots. So there's weird little alliances you kind of form based off how that map is laid out and who's close to you and what is the likelihood everyone's going to murder you. And it's no, we got to take out this guy first before he just shoots something that will blow up all of us because we all spawn right beside each other except for him, kind of thing. So Scorched Earth is very cool. This wasn't multiplayer, but I watched my friend play a lot of Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy 8. Funnily enough, I owned those games, and I think he eventually bought them on his own as well, but I owned those games, and I just brought them over to his place, and I was like, I don't know, play this, and he played them, and he had a great time with them. He beat them well before I did. It was interesting that I guess there's very few things in my life where I bought a game, I owned a game, and then I brought it to somebody else and they beat it. The other thing is maybe Endless Ocean with my sister. I bought that game, she played it, I watched her, she beat it, it's done. It's funny because there's some people that is kind of the opposite experience for them. My sister spends more time watching games than she does playing games. And I think that's like interesting that there's very different experiences in that regard. And like, I think in some ways it kind of informs how you feel about games a little differently as well. So we played a lot of Iggy's Wrecking Ball growing up. This is a weird Nintendo 64 game where you're a little ball thing, usually kind of grotesque looking. It's a very American 90s kind of thing. And you like shoot these little arms out of you, ? I don't even remember. Like, I haven't looked at this video game in a very long time. And you just kind of like race around these rings and you kind of bounce up and you bounce around this course. It's a very strange game in terms of like this course structure it's not like 3D, it's all 2D. And so it's more about finding places on the course you can like lift yourself up, and different like textures or different like, I don't know. I'm saying textures because literally video game texture work on platforms, but like what would it be for like rocks, like a rock platform versus a paper, I don't know, paper? I don't know, plant, thing. Like how you interact with them is different, and like which ones you can grab onto or not is different. And you can also, I think, maybe swing around as well. I can't remember for sure. It's been a long time, but we played a lot of that growing up as well. Uniracers, I think that's a pretty popular Super Nintendo game as well. That's kind of just you ride around as a Uniracer. That's a Rockstar game when they're a DMA design. I don't know if I have any really interesting stories about Uniracers though. We liked it and we played it a lot, and the music, the presentation of that game was something I really enjoyed overall, and the music I think is really good too. I really should put the music on my playlist. I don't think I have that still. That's something I should do. Hopefully I remember after this podcast. Some PC games, Age of Empires 2, Diablo 1 and 2, StarCraft, Warcraft, played that with a friend. Even though we were playing online, we were in the same neighborhood, so it was kind of locally to some extent. And then, the usual Mario Karts and Smash Brothers and things like that. Mostly Nintendo 64 eras when I was doing a lot of multiplayer gaming. Once it got to GameCube, it was significantly less. And then by the time like the Wii came out, I think my sister was in the process of moving out. And then, so I think the majority of that era was the beginning of Ben never plays local multiplayer because nobody's around to play local multiplayer. So yeah, unfortunately since then, I haven't played too much more than that. So anyways, again, thank you, Jillian, for your questions. I appreciate that. Again, you can support me on Ko-fi if you'd like to. I kind of am trying a different approach with the Ko-fi posts right now. I know these things change all the time. But I think what I'm going to do with the Ko-fi post right now is kind of focus it more on plans and content that I plan to do and things like that, and like the struggles of like what certain types of content I've been challenged or been struggling with and things like that, and be a little bit more candid there. I know I've usually done this on the podcast, but I kind of like keeping the podcast more focused on the video game content stuff, and like I don't necessarily know if like people listening to the show necessarily want to hear the how the sausage is made kind of thing, right? Where I think if you're supporting me on Ko-fi, that's probably a more regular thing. All the posts are public right now though, so there's no paid posts to get in at the moment at the very least. So I don't think I'll do anything paid posts for a while, but I did go ahead and do a new post this week though. So if you want to check that out, or last week by the time you hear this. So if you want, or is over the weekend. So if you want to go hear that, or read that, go check that out and get some thoughts on where I'm going with the main channel with that. All right. Before we get into news, we got a video to talk about. Shanghai Triple Threat. Why play Shanghai Triple Threat? The PCFX is a system that's really starved for like really easily playable content if you're like in the English speaking community, right? Because there's so many, Japanese text requirements. All these games are very, very text heavy. So Shanghai Triple Threat is one of the few games that is just like easy pick up and play for the most part. There's some Japanese text, but you can figure it out or like look up the rules pretty quickly. Basically what Shanghai Triple Threat is this game that I think often gets called like Mahjong Solitaire. But basically you have these stacks of Mahjong pieces on this board, and the goal is to kind of like pair two of these Mahjong pieces together that are matching pieces, essentially. There's a couple exceptions, but for the most part, they are matching pieces. And once you match them, it goes ahead and deletes that piece from the board itself. And the idea here is that you kind of whittle away at the board until there's nothing left. But there are some rules around it that, make this a little harder than just identifying the pieces and clicking them. Basically, there's kind of two major things you have to consider. One is that nothing is on top of the piece, so it can't be partially covered. And then also, there can be nothing to the left and the right of the piece. So I think if there's something to the left or right, it's fine. But if it's the left and right, you're not able to use that piece. Or I should say touching the piece. You can use something to the left if there's a gap kind of thing. So it's pretty simple in concept. But where the real challenge here is when you end up in states where basically you can't proceed anymore. So, there's this tile that is the same tile stacked on top of each other, and there's no way to reveal that tile because the tile needed to delete it is below it kind of thing, right? Or there's some other situation where later on the board, you need a tile to clear a piece to get to this other piece, but you already have that other piece like locked away somewhere. So basically, there are ways you can end up in situations where you are locked out from using certain tiles on the board. So what you have to do is kind of pre-plan by, keeping an eye on the board. You can kind of get a general idea of what a tile is underneath, though you usually can't see the entire picture. And you can also keep in mind how many tiles you've deleted already, because there are 2 pairs of each tile. So there's 4 of each tile basically in total. So if you already cleared a 2 pair, then you then know that the 2 that you see now are the only 2 remaining. So what this really kind of results in, if you're not any good at this, is just spending a lot of time really focusing on deleting as many tiles on top as possible and hoping it works out. I really couldn't figure out like if there is a actual strategy to, making sure you can actually clear each board. And I think that's something that became very apparent as playing through, is that like for the most part, I don't really know how that kind of works. But I was able to stumble through parts of the game at the very least, because there's basically 2 different ways you can experience Shanghai Triple Threat. One is the arcade mode, which is timed and incredibly stressful. And then there's original mode, which basically is laid back, take all the time you need, which is kind of interesting because it is 2 very different feeling modes, even though, it is something that doesn't necessarily change the game all that much beyond just adding a timer, essentially. There are some special rules in original mode that do set some limitations. Basically, in original mode, you can shuffle the pieces if you want, so you can basically have everything be moved around. Although in particular modes, it kind of depends on, we'll get into the different games in a little bit here, but some of the modes in particular inside original have some limitations on when you can shuffle. So some of those basically require that you realize you are losing before you lose. So you need to make sure before you run out of pieces, realize you cannot complete this board, and then go ahead and shuffle. Otherwise, if you try to go all the way and use as many pieces as possible and then get stuck, it won't actually let you shuffle. So you have to kind of predetermine before you actually get to that point, essentially. But there are other ones that don't seem to care, and as long as you get to you can get to the final move, and it does not care, just let you shuffle it anyways. And as far as I can tell, it's kind of unlimited shuffle. I don't really know if some people would view that as cheating, honestly. I don't know much about Shanghai Triple Threat and the community behind Shanghai Triple Threat. What is the proper rule set? This game seems to be kind of willy-nilly on what you want to do and what you can set those options to be if you want it to be. So, but between both the arcade and original mode, there's basically different types of boards you can play. One is being Great Wall, which is the standard one where everything kind of stacks on, or sorry, Shanghai? Yeah, Shanghai, which is everything stacks up, which, is the standard mode. But then you have Great Wall, which is basically a single layer of pieces, so you don't actually have them stacked, at least on top of each other in the way that they appear in Shanghai. But instead, they're stacked on top of each other vertically. And so you basically, pair pieces, and as you pair them, the pieces will fall down in a very Tetris-style way kind of thing. So it is a different mode in that regard. But, you do still do kind of the same thing of making sure there's no piece to the left or the right, and that helps you, delete things. Although, things being on top of each other doesn't really matter in that mode as much. And then there's also a mode called Beijing as well, which basically lets you slide pieces around vertically and horizontally. Again, you can delete pieces normally in this mode as well, but when you run out of moves, sliding them around is kind of the way you're intended to find additional pieces to combine and delete, essentially. So there is a 2-player mode as well, but I didn't get a chance to try it, but I imagine it's probably pretty similar to the arcade mode in terms of, having a very intense feeling if it's a competitive game, right? Unfortunately, I part of me like wishes I spent more time with the arcade mode, but I was never able to actually get through it all. If that's even intended, right? As arcade games, how many actually intend you to clear all their boards? It seems like there's about 20 in each playthrough, which even on easy, I really struggled with. You can kind of brute your force your way through, but I don't really feel like you get a lot out of that. So, it's a game, though, that doesn't really use any of the PCFX's strengths in any real apparent way, at the very least. It is maybe, I don't know if the music's streaming off the disc at all or something, but the music sounds, decent enough. And the static images for the backgrounds are pretty nice. They're just basically photos of random places in China, I assume. I don't know. And they're also there's like different tile pieces you can select as well. But I stuck with the standard Mahjong pieces because once you learn how the pieces that don't entirely match up in Mahjong, it's a little easier just to keep those in mind rather than switch between different, visual palettes and remember like, oh, which of these birds are the ones that are supposed to combine with each other kind of thing. So I will say I did look at the Sega Saturn version of this game, and which is contemporary version. I mean, this game is on 30 billion platforms, so each like 3DO, PCs, all that stuff. But at least compared to the Sega Saturn version, this version of the game is like incredibly visually simple. There's just not really a lot of effects going on, and I'm pretty sure this game came out quite a bit later as well. So it is just kind of underwhelming. It seems like a fairly cheap port overall, but for the PCFX. And Activision, a Western developer engaging on the PCFX, it maybe isn't too surprising that it came out kind of the way it did. So, should you play Shanghai Triple Threat on the PCFX? It's a great question. It's a good game. I think the big thing is that like Shanghai at its core seems like a good game. And I think there's actually a lot to really respect about the arcade and original mode, despite being built on the same foundation. Just really changing the feel of that game just by adding a timer, essentially, right? And I think there's a lot to be said about that through this, essentially version of Shanghai. Again, other contemporary versions are basically identical as far as I can tell, outside of some small changes and things like that. So like that version of the game in general, I think is really cool. And I think the big thing, maybe more than anything, is just like finding a version of Shanghai that's most accessible to you. If that's the PCFX for some reason, why not, right? Why not check it out? And if you're trying to look for something to use on your PCFX, or if you're like me and got a PCFX mouse, and man, here's a video game that uses the mouse pointer in the proper way, unlike most other PCFX mouse games, then this is a game that you can use that is a fairly intense use of the mouse. Is it maybe the best mouse game on the PCFX? Who can say? But I think it, no matter what version you end up playing, I think you'll have some fun in there, and have a good time. So I think it is something that if you've never played Shanghai or Mahjong Solitaire in your life, and you want something that's a little bit more slower paced or something like that, yeah, play Shanghai Triple Threat. Maybe just don't buy a PCFX to play one. So, yeah. So the reason why I pushed this little review here afterwards is because Shanghai Legends got announced. So Shanghai Legends got announced from Sunsoft. I looked at the screenshots. Guess what? Looks like Shanghai. I don't remember how much it costs. I don't know if they even said it. I think it's a game. I don't even remember when they said it's going to come out. There's probably information out there. I did not care long enough to look at it beyond just being like, yeah, that's Shanghai. So Shanghai Legends confirmed is coming. Anyways, so I wouldn't talk about that otherwise, but in this particular episode at this particular time, like the stars aligned, God wanted me to talk about Shanghai Legends, even just for a moment. So yeah, Shanghai Legends was announced a part of the Bit Summit show coming up here shortly. So it's July 14th to the 16th. Bit Summit, if you don't know, is a typically indie game kind of thing in Japan, but some other companies get involved. Sunsoft being one of them. Sunsoft being the Shanghai Legends guy there. They also are showing off Euphoria, the Saga. Is it Euphoria, the Saga 2? I thought this was a remake of Euphoria. So I don't actually know what's going on with that. I didn't like we've talked about this game that was announced a while ago. I did not do the research into this. I'm only talking about Sunsoft with Shanghai's here. So please excuse me for not going deep into what's going on with Sunsoft here. The only other thing that really caught me with Sunsoft is they have something called Lupin, like Loopin, and it's a VR visual novel. I don't know if this thing's out already or if it's coming out. If it's coming out, it's bizarre that they're doing a VR visual novel today. I just feel like that is kind of a, space and genre that has not really, I don't know. I guess I don't know how it's doing, right? Maybe VR visual novels are the next big thing that's happening, right? I don't know what's going on there. So I'm kind of curious. I should have looked more into these, but this is a Sunday night podcast. It's almost 1 a.m. We're podcasting. We're getting through this. This is not a part of Bit Summit, but Taito, they announced a Laserdisc trilogy or Laserdisc collection, which is pretty cool. So this includes Time Gal, Battleship Yamato, and Ninja Hayate. If you don't know, these are all kind of, I guess, FMV games, maybe. I someone on Twitter recently told me that FMV games have to be real people. Full motion video is what FMV stands for. So I guess the question is anime full motion video? Don't know. Anyways, it's one of those games where they draw a bunch of anime and then you basically put in like QuickTime events and make decisions to change the outcome and then another animated sequence plays. There's nothing wrong with that, right? I'm a Battle Heat fan, although Battle Heat's maybe a bit more engaging than... Well, I haven't played these games, but Battle Heat is maybe a bit more involved from a, how quickly you're putting inputs in and how fast it's responding on screen. But Time Gal is a big one that, like, the only US version of that I'm aware of is the Sega CD version. Is there a US version? I actually don't know. I'm not a Sega CD guy. I think there is. But Time Gal is the big one. And then there's other versions that were on Laserdisc and things like that as well. So hopefully, this is like the highest quality versions of these coming out. I'm considering it because Time Gal is a game that like I have never really wanted to play. What's it called? What's the big one in the US? Dragon's Lair. But Time Gal, as a person who typically cares more about Japanese aesthetics when it comes to this stuff over Western aesthetics. Time Gal is a game that I've always wanted to check out. So it's pretty pricey, though. I think the price in Japan was about 100,000 yen or like 90 or whatever it is. It essentially what would have been $100, but now with the exchange rate being how it is, like it's probably closer to like $60. So I don't know. We'll see. The Battleship Yamato, I'm actually a fan of the Battleship Yamato anime, or the first season of it. That is an interesting show because it takes place over the course of a year, essentially. It's like a space odyssey kind of thing. I don't remember what Ninja Hayate is beyond just remembering seeing YouTubers being like, Ninja Hayate, it exists. So anyways, I'm kind of interested in that. It looks pretty neat. I'm going to guess if that gets localized, it will be through like Lunar Run Games or something like that. But, hopefully not. Hopefully it'll be more accessible. Anytime anything goes to Lunar Run Games, I'm disappointed because that means I'm probably either importing the Japanese version or not getting it. So yeah. We're going to go in a little bit of a mobile game corner here real quick, and then we're going to wrap up with some updates here on some previous news stories that we've had. Mobile game corner. I saw a game this week called Punishing Gray Raven. Seems like it's already out. I mean, in the mobile game space, it's hard to really know what's going on there, or keep up with it. But it did catch my eye because the combat's like super flashy. And like, I haven't really messed with third-person action games on mobile, I will say. So I actually don't really know like what that looks and feels like to play. I really probably should. Should it be Punishing Gray Raven? Probably will not be it. But anyways, but the guy they added in that game reminds me a lot of Tina. Oh my God, we're going back into old podcast. Tina from Closers. I remember we talked about this on a podcast. It must have been like episode 40 or something like that, some low number, which made me play Closers because Tina has like a sniper rifle and stuff. And this is like a side-scrolling beat 'em up, right? She has a bunch of guns, but the sniper rifle is the big thing that caught my eye because it essentially like really pushed enemies back and knocked them against the walls and bounced them around and stuff. And Tina herself would like bounce back as well. And there's like this really intense like knockback feeling that I think is really satisfying playing someone like Tina. Tina also has like a lot of interesting moves from a movement perspective too, where she kind of like runs around characters and does figure eights while shooting them. She like runs out of the side-scrolling level and like comes back in while shooting everyone. It's really, really cool. So this guy reminded me a lot of that. It looks kind of cool. And it seems like a lot of the other characters, I mean, he has like sniper rifles as well. And it kind of seems like he like stacked skills or something. Like he had a move where he would go into a sniper position, snipe, And each time he sniped, I don't know if it matters where you snipe or what. Each time you snipe, it like added like a stock onto something, and that stock seemed to like add into like how much of a combo you could do. So it seemed like they're like doing some interesting stuff there. I just don't know what that looks like to play in terms of like, you know, are you just holding the button and then the combos just go? Or do you press the button a bunch? I mean, like, you can't do, like, complicated inputs on mobile. I could be wrong. I don't know. I haven't played one of those games before. I really need to play a mobile game like that at some point. But, again, probably not Punching Gray Raven. It just really caught my eye. The other characters definitely have a lot of the very similar feeling things to, like, how enemies respond to you hitting them, which I really liked as well. So, very, very flashy, which was really cool. Final Fantasy VII, The First Soldier. So I shouldn't have led with that, but we're going to start there, I guess. So Final Fantasy VII, I guess we're not going to start there. Final Fantasy VII, what's it called? Oh my gosh, EC? I'm blanking on the name. Eternal Conflict. I don't know. Something Crisis. Eternal Crisis? I don't know. It's the new Final Fantasy mobile game. This podcast is going well, but, you know, again, 1 a.m. for a Sunday, maybe is about as expected. Anyways, Ever Crisis. There we go. Got it. Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis. This game has been in beta. We talked about it going into beta before, and I mentioned the fact that Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier is a part of the original story of that game, because when you finish Final Fantasy VII First Soldier, you get a notice saying that you have graduated and you've been accepted to join an elite squad, essentially. And that elite squad includes Glenn, and I forget the other two characters' names, but the characters that are in Ever Crisis representing Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier, right? And obviously First Soldier as a video game is now dead at this point. I would like to do a video on that at some point, but we'll see if that ever happens. But they're adding story content based around this, and gosh, I do kind of really want to play it. But the big reason I'm talking about this is that I was reading an article about, or from Game Watch, a Japanese article. So we're in machine translated territory here, where basically they talked about the structure of this game. And if you don't know Ever Crisis, the point of Ever Crisis is to kind of retell the Final Fantasy VII story in one mobile game. So this is to go through Final Fantasy VII, Crisis Core. I assume before Crisis will end up there as well as Dirge of Cerberus and things like that. But obviously just in a turn-based form. So I'm assuming those are going to happen. But it sounds like to get to the First Soldier content, you have to beat Final Fantasy VII and beat Crisis Core in there. And then you get to the new story, which I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that setup, honestly. I guess to some extent they're probably expecting, if you're playing this, you already know Final Fantasy VII. So or maybe I should say, you care the most about Final Fantasy VII, right? You're not a weirdo like me where you're like, oh, when we talk about the best Final Fantasy VII games, Dirge of Cerberus, First Soldier, and then, I don't know, maybe Final Fantasy VII below that, right? When you have an asshole like me around, you're not thinking about me. So people, I don't know, maybe people are more excited to get into Final Fantasy VII, but I was kind of hoping that it would be a little more open-ended and like a fun way to be like, oh, I never played Crisis Core. And there's, obviously now there's a modern way to play Crisis Core, right? But, I never played Crisis Core. Let me play this. I never played before Crisis. Let me play it through here and not like bog you down by having to play through whatever all of Final Fantasy VII is, right? How long that is in this game is all kind of up in the air. I did the Game Watch preview did not mention how long it took to them to get from part to part to part. But I guess really I'm just sitting here saying that I'm interested and I'm tempted. I'm interested and I'm tempted. Okay. Anyways. And then we got a couple updates here. Quester. We talked about this game a while ago. This is a PC 88-ish looking kind of action top-down RPG kind of thing. Maybe not top-down, dungeon crawler RPG. Maybe inspired a little bit more by wizardry or something like that. Has a very like cool post-apocalyptic look to it and things like that. That came out on May 15th apparently, so that is out. The previous version was out already, but this is kind of like the official release. I think the last version was like a DL site release kind of thing, which I don't think it's like too uncommon where they have like a kind of more amateurish release that happens in the like kind of Comiket and then DL site scene. And then if they're like, oh, this actually is a cool idea to expand upon, let's make an actual video game around this that can like release on Steam and things like that. I think that is something that does happen. But anyways, one thing I did notice though, I wasn't really clear on, is that when I tweeted about this game originally, the developer actually reached out to me and said, we would like to bring this game to English. I was like, thank you for letting me know, I guess. But their Steam page is entirely in Japanese, but there is a section for language in the corner, and it does checkmark English in there. Like, English is literally in Japanese, but it says English okay, basically, is what it says. So, I don't know. I'm kind of tempted to pick it up and purchase it. But anyways, I just thought I'd bring it up because we did talk about the Quester in the past. If you haven't checked out Quester, I'll have a link in the show notes this week for Quester. And then our last news story to get updated on is Yuji Naka, Mr. Yuji Man himself. Everybody wants Yuji Naka to go to jail. And unfortunately, it seems like maybe that didn't actually work out. And I say that sarcastically. I actually do not have any strong feelings about whether Yuji Naka should go to jail or not. The legal system has decided, though. The reason why people were very excited about Yuji Naka going to jail, outside of just like, look, there's a history with Yuji Naka. There's a whole thing with Yuji Naka. Let's not get into that. Let me just say, okay, there was a misunderstanding with what happened in this particular case. Not with Yuji Naka, but with what his sentence was. It sounds like, based off, I think Cheesemeister on Twitter had explained this. Yuji Naka is not going to prison. He is basically going to go on parole for 4 years. And as long as he doesn't mess up or do anything bad, he will basically, I think, get to stay home. I don't know how parole works, but basically it sounds like he's not going to go to prison, for a extended period of time unless they give him a reason to do that to him. So I don't know anything about Japanese law, so I'm only running this by this, but that seems to be through Cheesemeister, which I have seen before be a pretty reliable source in the past. So, I think that's probably reasonable. And I think also, given the sentencing he got, makes sense. Or at least to me, as somebody who doesn't know anything about legal, that makes sense that he wouldn't necessarily go directly to a prison. Anyways, he's also getting fined $1.25 million, about, it sounds like. So, yeah, we'll see. I am curious to see if that means anything for our relationship with Yuji Naka going forward, right? Obviously, Yuji Naka has I don't know how much money he has, but that's not really my business. Also, I will say it is nice that he won't have to stay away from his kids, kind of thing, right? That would have sucked to, in the middle of your kid's childhood, have to go to prison. But, again, whole other thing there. But I think the bigger thing, though, for us, our question is, if he will be in a situation where if he needs to look for work or something like that, if he will be able to get back into the game industry, either as a consultant or doing his own work, kind of thing. It feels like there's been a lot of stuff kicked up around him enough that a lot of people probably wouldn't want to work with him in the game industry anymore. So I don't know. And he might have enough money to live life comfortably for the rest of his life. I don't know either. So, but it does mean that there's a possibility that he may come back and work on games depending on that financial situation. But we'll see if that actually happens. Either way, Yuji Naka not going to prison. I know everyone wants to meme about it, but here we are today. He is on parole. Probation. That's what it is. Probation. Not parole. That's going to be it for this week. Thanks for coming. OneChiller.com is the website. Like I said, the Ko-fi post, I made a post up over there if you want to see some writing for that. In terms of new stuff coming up, I might move. I have an Asphalt Urban GT podcast clip highlight going up on the OCP Plus, but I might move it because there's a PCFX podcast coming out this week. I think it might come out on Wednesday. I don't know for sure yet, so but we'll see. Anyways, so that's going to be coming up here shortly, and then I've been working on some scripts and things like that, working on some new ideas for things, and hopefully some of it surfaces sooner rather than later. I'm hoping. I know it's been a while, so apologies, but it's been a little bit of a turbulent time for the YouTube channel, so I appreciate your guys' patience while I go through all that stuff. And I guess that's it. I think my brain is just tired right now because it is Well, I don't know how tired I actually am, but it is late at night, and I should be wrapping up here, and I still gotta edit this and put it online. So I'm gonna go. Goodbye. Have a great week. Bye.